In the sprawling corridors of the Sterling estate, wealth wasn't measured in dollars, but in the weight of its secrets. The marble floors were cold and the silence absolute, broken only by the hushed footsteps of staff who were paid handsomely to see nothing and say nothing. For most, this was an easy deal. But for Clara, the newest maid, one mystery was becoming impossible to ignore. It was the silent ritual of a 10-year-old boy, a daily vigil for a mother he supposedly couldn't remember. And the more she was told to look away, the more Clara felt an unshakable pull to uncover the truth. The entire narrative is a fictional story and does not reflect any real events, people, or situations as of November 7th, 2025. In the echoing halls of a billionaire's lonely mansion, a young maid named Clara noticed something strange. Every day, the heir to the family fortune, a quiet 10-year-old boy named Leo, would spend hours staring at a single photograph. He wouldn't speak or play. He would just stare. The staff was told to ignore it, a sad, harmless quirk of a boy who'd lost his mother too young. But Clara couldn't shake the feeling that the secret behind the boy's silent obsession was one the family would do anything to keep buried. Clara had been at the Sterling mansion for 3 months, her days a blur of polishing silver and dusting furniture that cost more than her college degree. The master of the house, Alistair Sterling, was a formidable figure. He'd built an empire from silicon and steel, yet he couldn't build a bridge to his own son. He was a ghost in his own home, his presence announced by the scent of expensive cologne in an empty elevator. He rarely spoke to the staff, and he spoke to his son even less. Leo was the silent prince of this empty kingdom. He was a pale, serious boy with his father's dark hair, but his eyes held a sorrow far too deep for his age. Most staff kept their distance, treating him like another piece of priceless, fragile art. They ensured he was fed, clothed, and on time for his tutor, but they didn't engage. It was easier that way. But Clara saw more than a quiet child. She saw a profoundly lonely one, and his ritual was the center of his solitary world. Every afternoon, Leo would walk to the grand sitting room, a sterile museum of Alistair Sterling's success. He only had eyes for one object. On a mahogany side table sat a silver picture frame. He would pull a small stool over, sit, and simply stare. Sometimes he'd lift a small finger to the glass, his lips moving silently, forming words no one could hear. Clara tried to break through, bringing him freshly baked cookies or a glass of milk. "Leo," she'd say softly, "I brought you a snack." He never turned, never acknowledged her. His focus was absolute. When she asked the head housekeeper, Mrs. Gable, about it, the answer was swift and cold. "Mr. Sterling's instructions are clear. We do not disturb Leo. He is processing his grief in his own way. It's not our place to interfere." Grief. That was the official story. Elara Sterling, Leo's mother, had died in a tragic car accident nearly 6 years ago. Staff whispered that he had no memory of her, that the photograph was an object he'd latched onto. But Clara didn't believe it. This wasn't grief for someone you couldn't remember. It was a vigil, it was a search. Every day, Leo sat before that photograph not to mourn a ghost, but as if he were waiting for the person inside to finally speak back. Clara's chance to see the photograph up close came 2 weeks later, during a deep clean of the sitting room, while Alistair Sterling was out of the country. Mrs. Gable watched her like a hawk, but when she stepped out to take a phone call, Clara had a few precious minutes. Her heart pounded as she abandoned her dusting cloth for the table. The picture was of a breathtakingly beautiful woman, with kind eyes and a cascade of blonde hair, Elara Sterling. She was holding a chubby-cheeked baby Leo, posed against a stunning, rugged landscape of green hills and a misty coastline. It was an image of pure joy, but as Clara looked closer, she noticed a detail. On Elara's wrist was a unique silver bracelet, crafted to look like a delicate, feathered wing. It was unusual and clearly artisan-made. Clara committed it to memory. The woman's smile, the misty hills, and that strange, beautiful bracelet. Later that week, while tidying Alistair Sterling's cavernous office, she found another piece of the puzzle. Tucked in a desk drawer was a folder of paid invoices. One recurring payment stood out. A substantial monthly wire transfer to a place called Blackwood Creek Psychiatric Facility. The name chilled her. A psychiatric facility? Why was Mr. Sterling making regular payments to such a place? She gently closed the drawer. The name Blackwood Creek now burned into her mind. Clara knew she was playing with fire. Prying into the affairs of a man like Alistair Sterling was a fireable offense, but her concern for the boy was starting to outweigh her fear for her job. That night, she opened her laptop. Her first search was for Ilara Sterling. The results were immediate. Glossy society pages from 6 years ago. "Tragedy strikes Sterling family," read one headline. The details were identical across a dozen outlets. Ilara Sterling, on a solo vacation on the Isle of Skye in Scotland, had driven her rental car off a winding coastal road during a violent storm. Killed instantly. The story was tragic, clean and airtight. It was, Clara thought, a little too perfect. There were no messy quotes or conflicting witness reports. It was a story that had been carefully managed. She pulled up images of the Isle of Skye. The rugged green hills and misty coastline were unmistakable. It was the place from the photograph. Her next search was for Blackwood Creek Psychiatric Facility. The results were discreet. It wasn't an average hospital but an ultra-exclusive long-term care facility in a remote corner of upstate New York. Its website spoke of restorative wellness and discreet care for an elite clientele. It was the kind of place the wealthy sent their problems to disappear. A psychiatric facility? A car accident? A lonely boy obsessed with a photo? The pieces were swirling in Clara's mind. Why would Alistair be paying a place like Blackwood Creek for 6 years, starting right around the time his wife supposedly died? The thought forming was so monstrous she tried to push it away. She thought of Ilara's smile in the photo. Was it bright and happy, or was it the practiced smile of a woman used to being on display? The whole story felt hollow. The following week, an oppressive mood fell over the mansion. A multi-billion-dollar merger Alistair Sterling was orchestrating was going sour. The staff walked on eggshells, and the pressure seemed to affect Leo the most. His stillness was replaced by a restless energy. His vigil in front of the photograph became longer, more desperate. One afternoon, a sharp cry of frustration echoed from the sitting room. Clara rushed in to find Leo standing over his toppled stool, tears streaming down his face. In his agitation, he had knocked a heavy book off a shelf, which struck the side table, sending the silver frame clattering to the floor. "Leo, are you all right?" Clara asked softly. He just stared at the fallen photo, his chest heaving with sobs. As Clara bent to retrieve it, she saw the impact had knocked the velvet backing of the frame partially loose. Tucked between the backing and the frame was a tiny folded slip of paper. It must have been hidden there for years. Her heart leaped into her throat. She glanced at Leo, who was now rubbing his eyes, his outburst having exhausted him. He hadn't seen it. With an almost imperceptible movement, Clara slid the folded paper into her palm. She fixed the frame's backing and returned the photograph to the table. "There," she said calmly, "all better." She helped Leo back onto his stool. He returned his gaze to the picture, the crisis seemingly over. Clara retreated, the tiny secret in her fist feeling as heavy as a stone. Later, in the quiet of the linen closet, she carefully unfolded it. Written in faint, spidery handwriting were 3 simple numbers, separated by periods. 47.1.3. It wasn't a date or a phone number. It was a secret. It was a message hidden in the one place Leo spent his days, a clue left behind in a gilded cage. For days, the numbers 47.1.3 echoed in Clara's mind. They were a key, but she had no idea what lock they fit. She thought about coordinates or an address, but every theory was a dead end. She forced herself back to the tangible clues, the photograph and the bracelet. On a hunch, she shifted her search away from the family and toward the object itself. She typed "silver-feathered wing bracelet artisan" into the search bar. After scrolling through pages of generic jewelry, she found a match on the archived page of a niche jewelry designer, a bracelet from a collection called Seraphina's Wing. Clara clicked through the designer's blog. In a post, the artist wrote, "I often work with clients to hide small, meaningful engravings within the piece, a secret message of love or remembrance." A secret message. Clara's breath caught, but she couldn't see an engraving in the photo. She thought of Blackwood Creek. What if the numbers weren't a location but a designation, patient ID, a room number? She went back to the high-resolution society photo she had saved. She zoomed in, pushing the pixels to their limit, focusing not on Ilara's face, but on her wrist. And then she saw it. In the polished, curved surface of the silver wing, there was a distorted reflection. It was the faint, warped image of the photographer. It wasn't Alistair Sterling. It was the face of another woman. But that wasn't what made Clara's blood run cold. She panned the zoomed-in image to Ilara's face. The resolution was just high enough to see the expression hidden behind her wide, public smile. It wasn't joy. It was fear. A deep, unmistakable terror. The smile didn't reach her eyes. Her eyes were screaming. Someone else had been there that day. And Ilara Sterling was afraid. This was no longer about a lonely boy. This was dark and dangerous. The story of a tragic accident had completely unraveled, revealing a terrifying possibility. Ilara Sterling hadn't died. She had been disappeared. Clara knew she was at a precipice. She had no real proof, just circumstantial clues. Confronting Alistair Sterling was like walking into a lion's den. But what was the alternative? Leave Leo to his silent vigil and a woman to rot in an asylum? She couldn't. She had to take the risk, framing her findings as a worried employee. She chose her moment that evening. Alistair was in his study, the door slightly ajar, staring out at the city lights. He looked tired, almost defeated. Taking a deep breath, she knocked softly. "Mr. Sterling, may I have a word? It's about Leo." The mention of his son's name made him flinch, but he nodded. "Come in." Clara stepped into the room. "Sir, I'm worried about him. His ritual. With the photograph." Alistair's face hardened. "Mrs. Gable has my instructions. The boy is to be left alone." "I understand, sir, but I don't believe he's simply grieving. I think he's trying to tell us something about his mother." She watched his face, a mask of stone. She pressed on. "I know the photograph was taken on the Isle of Skye, but I've looked at it closely, sir, the expression in Mrs. Sterling's eyes. She looked frightened. Still nothing." Alistair just stared at her, his silence more intimidating than any shouting match. "And," Clara said, her voice dropping to a near whisper, "I know about the payments. To Blackwood Creek." A flicker of shock crossed his face before it was gone. He turned his back to her. "You've been going through my private things," he said, his voice dangerously low. "I was cleaning, sir," she lied, her voice not wavering. "It was an accident. Just as I'm sure it was an accident that a piece of paper with the numbers 47.1.3 fell out of the back of the picture frame today." The room was utterly silent. Clara had laid her final card. She waited, her entire future hanging in the balance. The silence stretched on. When Alistair finally spoke, his voice was cracked, stripped of its authority. "Get out," he whispered. Clara's heart sank. She had failed. She turned to leave. "Wait," he said. He turned from the window and Clara saw not a billionaire tycoon, but a man drowning in his own life. He sank into his leather chair, a whiskey glass shaking in his hand. "She didn't die," he said, the words tumbling out as if a dam had broken. "She's at Blackwood Creek, room 47, Ward 1, bed 3, 4713. The story he told wasn't one of malice, but of desperation. After Leo was born, Ilara had suffered from severe postpartum psychosis, swinging between lucidity and deep paranoia. Their high-profile life made it worse. She began to believe people were trying to harm Leo. The woman in the bracelet's reflection was Ilara's sister, hired as a private nurse, but even she couldn't manage the episodes. The breaking point came in Scotland. Ilara had an episode so violent, she tried to run into the stormy sea. Terrified, Alistair made a desperate choice. He used his resources to stage the car accident, paying off officials and crafting the perfect story. He had Ilara quietly admitted to Blackwood Creek under a false name, while her sister was paid to disappear. "I told myself I was protecting her," Alistair choked out, tears streaming down his face. "Protecting Leo from a mother who wasn't safe. I told everyone she was gone, even my own son." Leo had only been 4. He must have overheard a phone call or seen a piece of paper. The numbers 47.1.3, the code to his mother's prison, became the only fragment of truth his young mind could hold on to. He couldn't explain it, so he just pointed. He pointed at the photo, trying to tell the world the one thing he knew: she was in there. She was at 47.1.3. The confession left the room in a mournful silence. Alistair Sterling, the man who controlled empires, had been brought to his knees. He hadn't saved Leo from trauma. He had encased him in it. The very next day, things began to change. For the first time, Alistair checked into his son's life. A few days later, he took Leo by the hand, and together they boarded a private plane to a quiet facility in upstate New York. The reunion wasn't a dramatic movie scene. It was quiet, tentative, and achingly real. Ilara, stabilized on new medication, was a quiet, scarred woman. But when she saw Leo, a light that had been out for years flickered back to life. Leo looked from the woman to the photograph he had brought with him, his young mind finally connecting the image to the person. For the first time in years, he spoke his mother's name. It was the beginning of a long, complicated road, but it was a beginning. Clara had expected to be fired. Instead, Alistair offered her a promotion, a raise, anything she wanted. But what Clara earned was more valuable than money. She had earned a family's undying gratitude. She had given them back to each other. The great Sterling mansion began to feel less like a museum and more like a home. The silence was gradually replaced by tentative laughter, and in the grand sitting room, the silver photograph remained. But no one pointed at it anymore. The boy who stared at the photo now held his mother's hand, finally able to see the truth that had been hiding in plain sight all along. If this story moved you, please give this video a like, and don't forget to subscribe for more suspenseful stories and dramatic recaps. Let us know in the comments what you think the most powerful form of truth is.